I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. We're this guest we've had on several times, and people have started to ping me routinely to get this person back on. He made some big predictions just on this channel. One of them, this is when we were really mixing it up, is a year and a half, 2 years ago. He said that Russia, and the United States would end up working together. And what's going on in Syria? Correct. He said there'd be great strife in Europe and that there'd be civil war in France. Another bingo. He also said Turkey was going to be a real problem. Well, it is a real problem. They're a NATO country, and they're attacking our own, the people that we're backing, the Kurds in Syria. That's just one of many things. We moved our nukes out of Turkey. Let me bring him on. He is Warren Pollock. Warren Pollock, you are a financial analyst, a big-time financial analyst. You used to be. Now you're not anymore. You're just coming on to help us understand the world we live in. Way to go on all the predictions. You made many other predictions too, with about how the internet would snoop on you and know everything about you, Hadoop, and all that. Now, tell me what's going on right now with your predictions.
Well, I think I just want to talk about this very shortly and briefly because I think where we are is more important than where we will be. Because right now we're sort of in a twilight zone of transition between stability and instability. And during this time, I think it's a very dangerous time. For some, it will be more dangerous than the actual collapse. But some of the key predictions I made included a crisis in governance. And what you see in the elections today sort of speaks to that. I talked about quantitative easing, and I did that in 2003 on CBS radio. I talked about the fact that oil price would be where it is today, that there'd be no shortage of oil. And if you followed me from 2003, I think I've predicted things with a great deal of efficacy because I'm looking at things from a different perspective entirely. And thus, when I talk to you today, and I have a very important talk to you today, probably the most important talk that you'll hear in months, I'm going to talk about where we are in this twilight zone. I'm going to give a shout out to James Howard Kunstler, who spent about 2 hours with me on the phone, being a sounding board, and I'm going to use a key idea of his. I'm going to combine it with some key ideas of mine, and then give you a critical thinking overview of where we are and some tips on your own survival. And I think that's what is more important than me telling you where the world is going. I want to tell you today where you are and what you need to do, or at least to start to do, to try to protect yourself during a time where a lot of things work, but a lot of things don't work. And things are working right now for a very few. It won't work for them much longer.
I know one of the things you're talking about is trying to work around the system, and that's what's really going. And there's this big money grab, this big, state-sponsored, government-sponsored racketeering to take every asset they can get a hold of. Let's start there. How about that?
Well, I think James Howard Kunstler was very astute in his idea, and he put this in an overview. Carl Denninger speaks about this in detail, but I think the overview is more important. The entire system that we live in today is one large racketeering engine. And we really have to understand that for us to negotiate around this looting that's going to occur. You cannot eliminate all the looting from your life, but you can go around it to a certain degree. For example, if you go into a needed pair of eyeglasses today, you might have to spend several $100s on a pair of eyeglasses when someone in China is buying a pair of eyeglasses for $5 or $10 of the same or better quality. You talk about people in China having access to 3D printing technology. Here, right now, the big companies want to be involved in this sort of technology. In China, the small companies want to be involved in that kind of technology. So there are really things that you're going to need to survive, which are becoming less available to you. The EpiPen would be an example of that. And racketeering is
the EpiPen where they were, hold on, so people know, the EpiPen where they were charging something like, 5,000% higher, a $5 pen they were charging $800 for, or something like that. Is that right? That's what you're talking about?
Right. The medical industrial complex is sort of a nexus or a main part of racketeering. But really, when you think about it, racketeering exists in everything that you use today in your ordinary life. You go to buy a car, you can't do that. You got to lease it. You have to perpetually owe money for college. You have to buy very inflated, eyeglasses. You can't even buy a car that provides you with utility. The major cars that provide utility are now luxury trucks. So all of these are really racketeering elements. Let's say you deal with Verizon, they'll send you a letter. That letter will say, well, you could buy our new piece of equipment for $48 a month, or you could use our old one for an additional $2 a month. I'm sorry, you could buy our new piece of equipment for $50 and we'll charge you a fee, or you could just pay us a fee for your old equipment. This is racketeering. There is no competition in the United States. There is no free election. There is no free market. There is not capitalism. All of these things, which you believe to be in place right now, are lies. They are procedural systems, like the Ford assembly line, which are set up to be racketeering engines. Procedural racketeering. It's a veneer of a functioning economy, a functioning system. And this sort of procedural racketeering is also procedural control, procedural information gathering. It is the dystopia of epic proportions. I'm at the beach one day. I don't own a cell phone. I crushed the damn thing. And I am around me. All the cell phones are ringing with an Amber Alert. And all of the people are going to be mobilized to look for this missing person. But guess what? If you're a criminal, they will mobilize against you. A procedure has been put into stone to round up potential dissenters in the future. And this is not paranoia. This is fact. Fact. A psychologist realizes that all her patient relationships are now discovered by social networking. I talked about this in one of my presentations. Why do you think that Microsoft bought LinkedIn? It is procedural information accumulation. It is procedural control. Now, the eyeglass example is right on my mind. I went through this process in the eye doctor, and he moves you from station to station. And that makes sense because it's very efficient, like the assembly line. I get to the end. I say, please give me a prescription for short and long glasses. I don't want to wear progressive glasses. The millennial says to me, here, we only have a single prescription. Do the maths, M-A-T-H-S. I said, I don't want to do the maths. I just paid you for a service. Can you ask the doctor? No, it's the procedure. Think about how many procedures that you've run into in your life where they're telling you to see some other person to take care of some other element of what you need done. These procedures, you cannot proceduralize an economy, you cannot proceduralize a society and have it be functional. You can proceduralize some parts of a society to become more efficient. But if you try to proceduralize something that is very complex and you withdraw sort of the brains of the operation, I guess we have epsilons to alphas in our economy. If you take away the alphas and the betas, you cannot respond to exceptions. You cannot respond to corruption. You cannot be flexible in any way whatsoever. It is a rigid procedure. And think about your life and how you interrelate with procedures. And you will find that each and every one of these procedures leads to a destination, and that destination is racketeering. No doubt about it. And why don't we say that these procedures in total are described by some people incorrectly as the New World Order. The correct way to describe this is the apparatus, the procedural looting and racketeering apparatus that is systemically present in our political systems, in our economy, into our interrelations between each other. So we have sort of this apparatus similar to a communist apparatus, similar to a watch with many dials in it, many gears in it. And that apparatus, look, think about a watch. You have the gears, they start to wear a little bit. You're a cog in this machine, and all of a sudden the gears wear off one of these small components. And guess what? The thing functions poorly, and then a little later, the thing stops functioning entirely. Now, I could go and tell you where we're going to be geopolitically and even politically, financially, and otherwise. But I think for your survival, it is totally essential that you understand where we are with no ambiguity whatsoever. We are within the context of racketeering. Procedures are the tools which the racketeers use. And then the apparatus is the very large global system, peak apparatus, where we are today. And this isn't something you need to get emotional about. This isn't something you can blame on a single individual. We have allowed our system to degenerate to the point where people cannot make decisions. It's this idea, I think Harry Truman said, the buck stops here. Now, he was the beneficiary of local corruption. That's the way he got his political start. The way that he reached his apex, the top part of his career, is he fought against corruption during World War II that eventually made him the vice president of the United States, where he put on his desk a sign that the buck stops here. In reality, what we are watching right now is the buck stopping. The buck is stopping not only monetarily, if you look at M2 velocity of money, it's stopping in capital formation. People can no longer take their money and start a productive enterprise. The buck is stopping in terms of people critically thinking. The buck is stopping in terms of taking responsibility and having accountability in decision making. There is no decision making. I tried to squeeze a decision out of one of these procedures. I couldn't even get this person to ask the doctor a question, the optometrist. I said, give me the, she says she couldn't do the maths. She was not capable of doing that. And she was not capable of asking a question. If you're not capable of something, you have to ask a question, you have to learn it. And guess what those maths consist of? You take one number and add it to another. You take one number and you subtract it from another. That's the complex maths that college-educated people are not equipped to do. I speak to people at Morgan Stanley. I speak to people in American Express. And this generational gap is also a generational gap in thinking. All of these millennials, for the most part, or a large percentage of them, only know how to follow procedures. That is intentional. They have been tuned to agree and to conform to the most rigid nonsense ever created by mankind for the purpose of looting. The few millennials that I see and speak to that are aware are not college educated. There are people working, let's say, as a finance manager in car dealerships, and they understand how fatally flawed our situation is. They see their peers that cannot critically think, and they understand where we're going, and they're concerned because they're getting squeezed out. If they lose their job in the dealership, this one car dealer finance guy said to me, and I'll give you my procedural way to get around that. With eyeglasses, it's go to China directly and pay $5. But with cars, you could buy a commercial vehicle for less than you would buy a regular vehicle and have the same exact utility, have more durability. I bought the New York City Taxi as my major car, okay, $20,000. If you want to buy the same equivalent SUV or car or station wagon, it's $30,000 to $50,000. Where do you think that money, what value do you think the racketeers are giving you? So you have to evade all of these procedures. And really, you need to make choices in the way that you deal with the system. Now, I had a medical doctor who had to deal with the systems that were given to him by New York State. And what happened to him is he went berserk. He had a nervous breakdown. He took his car to the train station and wasn't seen again for a month. This guy, Randy Q, out of Manhasset. He was making a fortune. He had tons of patients, back office, top technology, and he couldn't take it anymore. That shouldn't happen to you. In procedures, there's such a thing as evasion and avoidance. Now, evasion is illegal, but avoidance isn't. And these are the challenges that you have to face. And sometimes with procedure, you can glide along it, knowing that this procedure is wrong, and use it to your benefit. What about Starbucks right now? They're having people order coffee online on their cell phone, and they leave the coffees lying around. In the old days, you used to have Horn and Hardart. You put in a quarter, you open the thing, and it gave you a sandwich. Starbucks is just putting free coffees all over their place for the world to steal. So that's a procedure that's good for them. And remember, these procedures that you're following are not good for you. They're good for someone else. And I know people that were hurricane victims, and what they did is they decided to glide along with the procedure. And as the corruption hatches out, the deal they're going to get is greater and greater. So if you're living in a world of racketeering, and I saw this before when I sort of traveled behind the Iron Curtain when communism was on the cusp of failing, people had to be very flexible. They had to think on their feet. They had to go and know when to pay the $20 bribe and when not to pay the $20 bribe. And that right now is required of you if you want to survive. Now, Greg asks a question, when is the collapse going to happen? And we're in a worse period, a pre-collapse period. This is what happened before World War II. This is what happened when Rome fell. There was a period in time where things worked sort of. A sort of function, a sort of dysfunction. And you know what? There's always been racketeering in our economy and in our society, and it's human nature. But here's the difference. In a society that's functional, the society can survive with some percentage of racketeering. Right now, racketeering is so pervasive that you cannot do the things that you need to do in a society for that society to function. So, Greg, I sort of said my piece. There's sort of a combination of punch of things that you need to remember. The things that you need to remember are you're dealing with apparatus, a global apparatus. You have to understand that it's an apparatus of racketeering control, of informational control, information gathering. It's a PC, procedural control, or control by procedure, or control by process. And we have to know also it's a looting process. And in this looting, your odds of survival decrease and decrease and decrease. So we have apparatus, racketeering, and as well as procedure in a twilight zone. So if I'm going to give you an overview of where we are, it would be in the twilight period, a twilight zone, a Rod Serling type of existence, a surreal existence. That's where we are today, and no one really has said this, I don't think, in a coordinated way. You can get snippets of this. You can get snippets of this everywhere, but the real thing is to put the whole thing together and then to use that as actionable information. I'm giving you tools in critical thinking for your own survival, and that's my gift to you today, as opposed to telling you where things are going. I'm telling you exactly without ambiguity where they are.
And you started out to say some things are going to work. Right now, things are working, but they're not going to be working long. Briefly, what do you think is going to work, and what do you think's not going to work?
I don't think anything is going to work properly. And the idea of the watch is the way to understand that. A watch is an integrated system. It's a systems of gears which intermesh. Now, I think it's Nassim Taleb, and I've actually read his book. He talks about having sort of a resilient society. And if you look at our society, there's right now a major freight carrier in bankruptcy, and guess what? The ships don't move. Everything is integrated to perfection, and everything is a watch with the cogs and gears fitting together very well. But a lot of the jobs, a lot of the things that people do are just for the benefit of procedure. Half, if not 3/4, or even 90% of the jobs in the United States are beneficiaries. They're in place strictly because of racketeering. If you're a school teacher, you're in place because of racketeering. If you are working at Geico and your job is not outsourced, you're a beneficiary of racketeering. If you're collecting a pension, you're a beneficiary of racketeering. If you're one of the elite, you're really a beneficiary of racketeering. And that's something you have to understand. But when I speak to the non-college educated kids that are very smart, and people are just as smart or dumb as they used to be before everyone went to college, and I think that's a Lee Kuan Yew paraphrase. If you think about that, these are the people, frankly, that are equipped to negotiate any kind of circumstance. They have skills. They can work with their hands. They know how to think. I was once a year, I go to the shopping mall. I went to the shopping mall. There was a fight in the food court. What did everyone do? Well, first of all, I'm in the Gap, and I'm not buying anything because I don't buy anything in the Gap. I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, the people are running down the aisle of Roosevelt Field Mall in a panic, some people holding up their cell phones in self-defense. And the Gap people move us down to the sub-basement of the Gap, and I get myself underneath one of these structural columns because I think that 9/11 is happening. Well, what happened? A fist fight broke out. Did any of the millennials handle it? No. Was the system in place there to handle it? The police? No. What did people do? They rioted at the first sign of distress. They could have evaluated the situation there. So you have a situation that's uncomfortable, and because people think that the cell phone will, some people think the cell phone will defend them if they get a picture to post on YouTube. Other people run for their lives, have a disproportional response to that sort of situation. And then the procedure means bring everyone down to the basement. And I looked for the exit door. And can I get out of this place just in case a nuclear bomb goes off in New York? What do I do? How do I react to it? In an integrated system, the smallest aspect of failure cascades. And that's what you need to remember. But we're not there yet. We are in the watch where the gears sort of function. And it gives you this idea that there's some sort of normalcy, that there's normalcy in politics, that there's normalcy in finance. And it's just a veneer, folks. It's a veneer with big, deep scratches in it. And right now, what's dangerous about it is sort of the sustainability of this racketeering apparatus, this looting apparatus, this process of control. And we can see that with quantitative easing. That's an example of it. Gee, we'll just steal from savers. That will fix it. And it just bides time. And what it does is it just makes the problem worse at the end. So we're into this sort of long fester. And as this fester continues, it really gets harder and harder for people to get the basic things that they need. I mean, can you really trust a society that's proceduralized agriculture? What if there's a disease they haven't seen? What do they do? What if the Zika virus hits? What if there's a hurricane? Do you really think the federal government's going to step in and help you? Or do you think they're going to help themselves and underpay people like they did in Hurricane Sandy? And that's been documented. So there's sort of like this veneer. Well, first of all, Carl Denninger realizes that the medical industrial complex is a big point of failure because you need that for life support. But the same can be said for food. The same can be said for transportation. The same can be said for people's ability to hold their jobs, people's ability to find jobs. I mean, now with credential creep, a job which used to require a bachelor's degree all of a sudden requires a doctorate. Don't you think that increases costs a lot? Don't you think that reduces availability? Don't you think that allows someone to steal from you? And that's what this is all about. And in a functioning society, if someone takes 20% off the top, it's not a big deal. But in today's society, almost 80% or 90% is skimmed. You know, in my eyeglass situation, you know, the same utility for $10 you can get for $500. What kind of society is that? Where's the other $490? In a teacher's pension, the teacher may have put in with the city or with the state a total of $400,000. The present value of their annuity is worth $2. Where did that 1.6 million to 2 million? Where did, if they put in 400,000 and they're going to be beneficiaries of 2 million, where does the money come from? How did that contract get written? In New York State, for example, and I had a discussion, an email with Newsday and also a state senator. I had a discussion with an executive at HUD, and my thinking to the newspaper, I said to him one sentence. I said that the top guys in New York State politics faced and were indicted for corruption. Why are any of their initiatives for the last 30 years valid? If a judge put 20 people on death row and then you found out he was indicted of corruption, don't you think there would be 20 appeals? That's the society that we're living in now, folks. There is no responsibility, and the buck stops. That is what is happening. Look at M2 velocity. You can see the buck stopping. It's there. People say they're printing money. Yeah, but look at the other chart, M2 velocity. Put them, overlay them, and you'll see that the economy has gone absolutely nowhere, and that the velocity of money has never been lower. The true economic activity has never been lower. And when you talk to people, the stock market's at an all-time high. They have. I said to one guy, he had 2 kids. He says, both my kids are employed. I said, what kind of jobs are they holding? One is working in food service. The other is processing Obamacare. So one is a beneficiary of the medical industrial complex. He's working in a hospital, handing out inedible food to people. And the other guy is a beneficiary of racketeering because he's helping to steal from other people by giving them Obamacare policies, which don't do anything. But this isn't just healthcare, folks. This is everything. And this time, this twilight zone, this transition time, it's going to last a long time. And it would be better if it collapsed. It would be better if they let the stock market adjust after 2008. It would be better for them to say, okay, this is where we are. This is what we need to fix. This is what we need to do. And then we'll be okay. We're beyond that. We're going to pay compound interest on the malfeasance and the ineptitude and the lack of taking responsibility, the lack of decision making. And that lack of decision making has been trained. A whole generation of people have been trained not to take responsibility, not to make decisions. And what they'll do is they've also been trained, and this is PC, you talk about procedural control. What about using those same letters as politically correct? Now, I said a term over dinner that wasn't politically correct, and I don't want to alienate people here because they'll just shut down their thinking. And the millennials were talking among themselves about how offensive this was. But guess what? Non-political correctness gives you a better idea of communication. Not being politically correct. There's no ambiguity in it. And these two were talking about it like it was the largest issue at all. And what it does is it allows this political correctness allows everyone's opinion to be important. And in that importance, you can be divided and conquered, frankly, because you always want people that can critically think to be in charge of your systems. This isn't an equal system. I mean, people are not equal. They just aren't. I mean, look at Ayn Rand. They just aren't. Some people can do some things very well. Some people can do other things very well. Very few people can do many things well. And this idea that we should specialize everything has removed basic skills that everyone needs. It's really an advantage to doing lots of things on a mediocre basis or an average basis, or building skills where your interest resides, or doing things which you've never done before. A whole generation can't do that. They've been told to do things. They've been told to take tests. They might be treasure troves of information, but they can't lever that information into anything. The only people that can lever that information have not been polluted by the system, and those are your non-college educated people or people who have gone to Ivy League institutions, and only a small percentage of them. So for you, I'm assuming that you're not a millennial, or if you are, start to critically think quickly. If you're not a millennial, what you need to do is to start to critically think and view everything as an apparatus, as a procedure, as racketeering. And that's what you need. That's what you need to do. I can tell you to fish. I can't teach you how to fish.
So I want to come up to gold. In the pre-interview, you said, I think gold's going to go down. I think they're going to raise interest rates and try to make Hillary Clinton look good. But gold is still a good way to get yourself out of the system, is it not?
It is, but I'm dealing with an estate of a parent, and what is very interesting to me is that things that you would think have tremendous value have absolutely no value and no liquidity. For example, like a Japanese trade vase from the 1700s or 1800s, it has a value on eBay. A paperweight might have value, a piece of cut glass might have value, a diamond ring might have value, but try getting value from that commensurate to its worth. You might see things of incredible workmanship that have absolutely no value, because they have no liquidity. And that's something that we have to anticipate with gold. I mean, right now, millennials would rather have, quote, experiences than buy anything tangible. Certainly in terms of antiquities and craftsmanship, things are never going to be handmade again. I mean, so wouldn't you want to buy them up? But the time horizon for people to realize this might be 30 or so years. So you have to anticipate with gold that gold may lose liquidity. It just may lose liquidity. And it's something you have to deal with. I mean, that's your time to accumulate gold. Right now, we're basing our decisions on how gold is priced by the racketeering apparatus. Why would you want to do that? And, I talked to these guys at Doral Refining, and not many people know who they are, but they actually collect teeth from around the country, and they go and melt them down. And when all these for golds, we'll buy your gold signs were around everywhere, they would take a huge cut, racketeering cut, and then they would go to Doral and get the right price. And that's a company that's available to you just as a consumer. So if you need gold, call them up. If you want to sell gold, call them up. And totally reputable.
But all these other big time money players are worried. They're worried about the bond market. They're worried about negative interest rates. They're worried about raising interest rates with, I don't know, that's $15 trillion negative. What happens to a negative 0.2% bond when the Fed raises rates 0.25%? I'd say it gets into big trouble fast, wouldn't you? I mean, that's what they're worried about.
I'm honored. When we're talking about this, we're playing into sort of the racketeering engine by talking about it. But I'll give you my take on it. Think like a crook. In every financial thing that you see, think like a crook. It helps you understand who you're dealing with. So if the interest rates, let's say, go up 1/4, people are not going to notice that they've been stolen from until months later, because most old folks have been put into safe bonds, and they put into ETFs, which are even less safe than bonds because they have liquidity risk, and in bond mutual funds. So what happens is when these things are sold off, you have the underlying security is sold off. The basket has to mark to market, and that's where you're going to lose your money. But guess what? If they raise rates 1/4, the U.S. now looks like the pig with lipstick, and the dollar gets stronger. Your gold goes down. The stock market might go down a little bit, but then go up. And that's why I'm thinking that gold might go down in the short term, because think like a crook. They can't do that. Well, sure they can. They did quantitative easing. What's quantitative easing? And which I predicted in 2003. It's documented. 2003, and I documented that was their direction. What this allows them to do, I just didn't think they would do it for so long. What this allows them to do is just sustain the theft. I'll give you another example. No Child Left Behind. Well, guess what? Like a gangster that grabbed their shirt and said, yeah, like James Cagney. Yeah, it's an opportunity to print some books. Yeah, that's how you have to deal with gold. The price is controlled by a racketeering engine. Don't play into it. The problem that you're going to have in sort of this twilight zone with gold is it may lose liquidity. And for example, if you needed something, you have an ounce of gold and you have 1/10 ounce of gold, and you don't have a liquid market, he'll give you the same thing if you give him an ounce of gold or 1/10 ounce of gold. So that's the way that you have to think. Liquidity is part of your decision making. I told you on your guest on one of your shows, keep a stack of $2,000 or $3,000 worth of 20s.
Yeah, you need it all. I tell people, I said, they don't think of, well, I need one thing. No, you need everything. You need flush valves for your toilets. You need tires for your car. You need a good battery. You need a good car. You need food. You need water. You need everything. You need everything that you need, that you think you need to get, because it's all on sale now.
No, what you need most is critical thinking. You need to be able to think on your feet. You need to understand the overview of where you are. That's the most important thing. And you need not to panic. So I see people that have been so divided and conquered, so polarized, so convinced that they're right, that they cannot critically think, even if they could. They've been confused by this informational overload that they can't think clearly. I've seen people in the shopping mall refusing to stay calm in an emergency. I've seen people follow the procedures to the gas chamber, because that's what that sub-basement would have been if there was a real incident. So you really, you have to be objective. You need an overview of where you are. You have to think. Not everyone is capable of that. If you don't know how to think, it's time for you to learn. It's time to be independent. And it's time to understand that procedures are in place that you can use as you slide along them, which you can buck. You could say, oh, you asked me to do that? Well, you're not entitled to that. There's the procedure for that. Why don't you speak to your compliance officer? Why don't you speak to your ombudsman? Oh, can you clarify this? Can you ask a question? Believe me, no one's going to take responsibility if you buck them. That could be used to your advantage in avoiding these things. If you evade them, they'll put you in jail, like Peter Schiff's father, like Martin Armstrong, or they'll defranchise you, make you a martyr, like Ann Barnhart. So, it's what I'm describing to you is sort of very complex. And the reason why you can't store everything is because you won't have the staying power that you need to deal with this. Because really, I think that the start of this trend was sort of, and I don't agree with peak oil, but I agree that there was a technological change in 1776. Hey, there was a political change in 1776. So we had a revolution. We have Thomas Newcomen. We have access to all this easy energy. Hey, does it really matter if you run out of oil, if you despoil the earth? Believe whichever one you want. It won't matter to you if you're not alive. So that's the kind of approach that you need. And, look, I could go through right now. I could say, this is going to happen in this country. This is going to happen with this country. This is going to happen with this country. And I'll be right or wrong. I'm 100% right when it comes to what this is going to happen to you. If you're not afraid, time is now to be afraid, and then forget about being afraid and start to deal with it. That's the solution. Deal with it.
And then
deal with the problem.
And this election, I'm going to give you a little to tie up. So you think they're going to keep the system floating? Do you think Hillary Clinton will make it? Trump looks awful strong at this point. She looks awful weak. Do you think they're going to steal the election? Do you think? Well,
I think the election's already stolen. I mean, I talk about this again in my Talk to Newsday about New York State. If you have two guys that are in corruption, one Democrat and one Republican, one's in the House, one's in the Senate, are you really in a functional republic? Well, if the state's not performing as a republic, isn't it the federal government's obligation under our Constitution to make sure that it does? And that's the idea of looking at things objectively, taking responsibility, doing something, and dealing with the consequences. Frankly, Trump is more apt to take responsibility for his failure because he's failed previously, and he uses his failure. He uses the procedure of bankruptcy to his advantage. That's an example. Oh, bankruptcy is a good thing. Yeah, it is, because he used the procedure to his benefit. At least he's providing that lesson. Clinton's providing the other lesson. Clinton is saying, if you give me your vote, if you want something, write a check to the, to this. If I need to do something, I'll just erase the emails. Okay, so you have one person that uses the process of the apparatus to his benefit, and you have the other person that sort of is part of the apparatus. She is part of the racketeering engine, and she uses that to her benefit in rigging the system. So, it's a person that writes down what the process is versus the person that glides through the process. Both those are effective strategies. They're not just strategies for running a functional country. That's the problem of it. I think that Clinton, her odds, let's say you read every day on the Drudge Report. Well, guess what? You're only reading from the Drudge Report. Read from the New York Times, and it's all anti-Trump. So,
oh yeah,
I commented on a Trump chat board as he was speaking, and there was no one listening. I said, "Is he saying anything new?" That's the only thing I said. I didn't get a single reply, and everyone thinks that what they're saying is important, and that's part of informational control that I talked about. The psychiatrist, where all of her relationships with her patients is disclosed. LinkedIn, knowing what medication I was on, it's unbelievable. It's a total dystopia. Your cell phone ringing. I think that was in Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. That was a book. Guess what? It's also in Wayward Pines. Okay, it's used well because the guy might be missing. Well, who the hell cares in a population of 300 million? Is it really important to wake all your citizens up to find him, or will he eventually be found? In Denmark, I think they have or one of these Nordic countries, they have a building, and the inside is a courtyard. So when the people with dementia go out, they can't leave the building. In the U.S., they let them run free because they can loot from them. And, Medicaid is a big looting engine. I mean, dealing with a federal agency, putting liens on your houses, that's a big thing. Getting permits. I did a title change in New York. Guess what? Oh, I haven't raised taxes in a million years. And then you see the fees. Red light cameras where, let's say, an emergency vehicle is behind you and you had to go through the red light. Do you think you can defend yourself against that? Good luck to you. So you have to know when to glide through the procedures. The first thing, you can't do what my doctor did, which is go nuts. I guess there was a song, "They're Coming to Take Me Away," ha ha hee hee ho. Do you remember that song as a kid?
Yeah.
I think it's on YouTube. And everything is backwards. Everything is confused. The psychologists are crazy. I mean, that's what you're living in right now. Listen to that song, and you understand very well, where we are. I've tried to make things as simple as possible. I mean, also, other people will take you down. in this sort of instance. I mean, if you're dealing with an insane person, I think I saw a movie recently. Their weakness is their biggest power.
Yeah,
It was a Philip Roth movie, and that's immoral. Because in these sort of critical situations, if you do not have this overview that I've given you today, and most of your friends, if you try to tell them this, they'll just get angry at you. You may have to cut them loose. It's just as simple as that if you want to survive, how important it is. And when I think about myself and yourself, I don't think sincerely and in the scheme of things that we're very important. 2/3 of our life, or I've seen my peers die, or 3/4 of our life have been lived. It's really the millennials that have been propagandized, divided and conquered, trained to be cowed. They're cows. Those people are really the true victims of our malfeasance, not to accept responsibility for our actions as a generation, and not to make decisions, and instead set up procedures which do looting. And again, James Howard Kunstler, the whole system is racketeering. That's what sort of started me off thinking, and that's what put me into this combination punch, where I could summarize it to you, very concisely, very clearly, and without ambiguity.
The whole system is racketeering.
The whole system, soup to nuts. And when I was traveling in communist Bulgaria, again, I went to, when the Berlin Wall fell, I didn't go to the Berlin Wall, but a few years later, I traveled by bus to the border of Turkey and Bulgaria, and I wanted to go over the border because I wanted to see what communism was like. And these people were evading the procedure of communism. I got a hitchhike. First of all, the border guard says Americans only fly. That's the first thing he said. He was using a DEC VAX computer, something he used from the United States, that we sold them. And I guess the U.S. has Henry Ford sold car plants to the communists, first of all. And he's like, go back to Istanbul, take the daily train, and this way we can screen you. So I didn't want to do that. So I hitchhiked overland, and the first city I hit is Poldev, and I hitchhiked with these two ladies that were smuggling yeast in, because yeast is something in a very small packet, and it's used to make bread. And I get to this town, and the whole town smells of machine oil. I go into a taxi, and I'm afraid for my life. I pick up the hood, and there is a natural gas can in the Lada. I go to the hotel. There's the bad prostitutes in the lobby and the good prostitutes near the casino at the top. You put $20 down on the casino, and they think it's a life savings. I gave someone the person that gave me a lift $100, and they thought it was like a year's wages. I mean, these are all the symptoms of where America is going next. It's not because of communism. It's because of a lack of integrity. A lack of integrity. Any system can work for you, where you think about things and then adjust. Any system. I don't care what you call it. I also predicted popularism. That was something that I predicted, I think, in my first Zero Hedge article. So here we are with Trump. But let's talk about our first talk, crisis in governance. Do you really think Hillary Clinton would have the moral authority to lead, Greg?
No.
Do you really think that the criminals who are the Democratic and Republican Party would let Trump lead?
Yeah, probably not. But maybe they'll pull it out. I just can't give up.
Even if they pull it out, I mean,
I just can't pull up. Maybe you'll pull it out. Power of the presidency is awful powerful.
That's what a crisis in governance is. And then there's the question of who's in charge. If the leader in New York, both leaders were sort of indicted for corruption, then the whole tree has to be chopped down, as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
But who's in charge? Who's in charge of the lunatic asylum? And the same thing with your federal government. I mean, I had a federal official respond to me in a letter that Congress had not empowered her to make a decision. Then why the hell am I paying your salary?
Yes.
So that's the sad state of affairs. The buck stops. A very good thing to remember. The buck stops. And the procedure stops is something else to remember. I know this isn't what we usually talk about, but I think this is the most important thing.
No problem.
And I'm sincerely trying to help your viewership.
You're trying to help them think critically, and I think you have done that. And we're going to call it right now. There is no thing that you have put up that you put together. So there's no website you link to. This is just for the people right here, and we just put it all out there.
And put down the internet. Put down the cell phone. My cell phone is in shambles, so I don't know. I can get it. I can get it for you.
I have a burner. I have a burner phone. I don't have a smartphone. But anyway,
well, you might consider using Google Chrome and as guest and rotating your IP addresses and MAC addresses.
There you go.
So,
hey, well, listen. You finish your thought. Go ahead.
No, that's it. I wish everyone good luck, and I hope they can make it through the next few years.
Warren Pollock, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. Always interesting, always different, and I got to say, usually and almost always correct 100%. Nobody's 100%, but you're pretty close, my friend. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
I'd like to be wrong, Greg.
Yeah, I know you would. Thank you, Warren Pollock.
Thanks.